we have a wonderful guest speaker here today, Milton Chen. Milton was the former executive director of the George Lucas Education Foundation, which is known for celebrating and encouraging innovation in K-12 and in education and learning. So a very, very exciting place in the education space. He's now a senior fellow there, but he's also worked at Sesame Workshop, spent some time at Harvard Graduate School of Education, wrote a book called Education Nation. So he's not only very busy, but he's also got his finger on the pulse of the kind of needs and opportunities of not only education, but that ecosystem that our education system plugs into. So we're really excited. He's a transformational thinker and innovator, and we're really thrilled and honored to have him to say a few words to kind of cap off our thinking here. So welcome, Milton.
Hi, Ann.
I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks a lot, and it's great to hear your voice. I last saw you delivering a talk at Stanford's Education's Digital Future, maybe it was last spring sometime. Great to see how the work has progressed in the last bunch of months. So I guess I'll run you through a few slides here. There you go. It's really exciting for me to be here to share some thoughts with you on the future of learning generally, and to hear what you're doing around badges and badging systems. I think two of the great movements for redesigning learning in this country and around the world are badges and our MOOCs. So how wonderful to have a MOOC about badges. I guess it was destined to be sooner or later what happened. And maybe someday there will be a badge for taking MOOCs. I'm also involved with the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, which has a future scenario planning group, and we have been doing some interviews with what we're calling extreme learners, ex-learners, kind of on the model of extreme sports. We think we're entering a time where people can be extreme learners, and one of the extreme learners we talked to was a young student, a college student named Feynman Liang, and someone will know the name Richard Feynman, and we asked him whether he was named after the great physicist Richard Feynman. He said, yes, indeed he was. So he has the namesake, and he loves to take MOOCs. He talks about in his own spare time when kids on college campuses are going out, you know, having a drink or, you know, generally kind of socializing. He loves to just sit down and take another class in a MOOC. He's taken, I think, more than a dozen MOOCs, and it's a good example of self-directed learners. And certainly badges are addressing that need that students have, young people have, and workers have to constantly rethink their skills and access new kinds of learning resources. So I'm very excited about this field. I thought I'd spend just a minute to say, how did we get here? It's a really exciting area of badges and badging systems and certainly MOOCs. But how did this happen? And where did the idea of the course begin? And how did it have such staying power over the past century? Why is it that course has been the main way in which we certify learning, and usually you have to go to a school or go to a college to take a course with a teacher. Now we're seeing that those courses are going online, of course. But worth rethinking that the Carnegie Unit and the student hour were invented more than 130 years ago. There were experiments with how to create and standardize what a course was. And if you look up some of this history just by searching on Wikipedia, search on the Carnegie Unit, search on the contact hour, you will see this thinking going on in the 1880s and 1890s about how do we define a course. Professors especially are giving all sorts of courses. They're taking up all sorts of time, all different sorts of requirements. Some of them are high quality, some of them are very low quality. So there was this movement in our country back then to rethink how do we standardize and define what a course is, and they came up with the Carnegie Unit and the student hour, and it was defined as 100 hours of what is still called seat time. They said, well, let's define a course as an hour a day, 5 days a week, and let's run it across 24 weeks, and that's 120 hours. You see the vocabulary used, seat time, contact hour. I was looking up some of the work done by Charles Eliot, who was a Harvard president in the 1880s. very interesting personal story that he had gone to Europe after not succeeding in getting a chemistry professorship. And he learned that, in fact, in the 1870s, 1880s, that Europe was far ahead of the United States. Harvard, you can imagine back then, was just a couple of buildings around a yard next to a river outside of Boston. It was not anything in terms of national, international renown. And he was able to become president. And he brought some of this new thinking about how do we really connect up what's needed in our society, that the crafts and the manufacturing in France and Germany that he saw was far ahead of the United States. So he was a leader in trying to help figure out how can we create colleges where students learn skills that are of great value in the workplace and will really help bring our nation forward. Also worth remembering that when we talk about the Carnegie Unit, which was put into place by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching in the early 1900s, one of the reasons they were doing that was not just to define the course, define what seat time would be needed, but they were actually trying to develop a pension plan for teachers. They were trying to come up with a way of providing a pension for educators, and they needed to know, well, what does a year of service involve? What is a course? So a lot of the thinking about defining a new learning system goes back to these ideas that people had many decades ago. And you see in the vocabulary that we used that it was really focused on time. The time was fixed and learning varied tremendously. Now we're moving towards an age where we're trying to define high quality learning and make that the standard, fix that as the goal, and let time vary. That some students who need more time to achieve these badges can take more time. Others who, for whatever reason, they have more time or more background, can move through them more quickly. So I think that's a key redefinition of learning and what badges can bring to this redesign of a new learning landscape. I'd like to just close with one example from our Edutopia website, in which while we weren't at the time a grant-making organization, the George Lucas Educational Foundation is starting up a second unit in addition to our Edutopia website that will be focused on trying to do more educational research, and especially on redesign of courses, and perhaps we'll be looking at project-based badges as well, and do the evaluation around what the students really learn. So as you can see from this slide, in the fall of 2008, we selected an AP course to redesign it as a project-based learning course, to move it away from the textbook course. And we tried to pick an AP course because there is this high-level test at the end. It's a standardized national exam. And we thought if we could show that students would learn through the project-based approach at least as well as through the textbook-based approach, that people would begin to pay attention to it. So this is a project called Knowledge in Action. Its nickname was AP Plus, and redesigned the AP U.S. Government and Politics course. Instead of doing chapters in the textbook, the students in these high schools in Bellevue, Washington, outside of Seattle, went through 6 project cycles. One of them, for instance, involved becoming a member of Congress. It was an election year. It started in the fall of 2008 into the spring of 2009. We thought it was timely. And one of the simulations was online. You can see it. It's called Ledge Sim, where you become a new member of Congress. So you look back on what your campaign promises had been. You form committees. You propose legislation with an attempt to simulate real legislative work. That's just one example of the project cycles. And we found, in fact, at the end of this evaluation, this was a grant that we gave to John Bransford at the University of Washington, and some of you will recall his name as one of the authors of How People Learn from the National Academy of Sciences. We found that, in fact, the students who took the project-based course did better than the students who took the textbook-based course on the AP exam itself. We learned that the project-based students did far better on what we called measures of deeper learning. That had to do with collaboration. That had to do with interest in American government. Perhaps it's timely I'm talking about this right now, but while our government is closed, that these students American government and politics shouldn't just be one course you take for an AP exam in a high school. It should be something that should lead you to greater interest in American government and how you can become a more active citizen. So in fact, on those measures, students did much, much better. But there you have it. They didn't get any credit for their greater learning on measures of deeper learning. They only got the AP exam score at the end. So hopefully, there's one example of how we can turn a more traditional course into a project-based course and develop a badge, for instance, to measure the deeper learning that would incorporate perhaps the traditional exam, but also show the much broader, deeper learning that students can get out of these sorts of experiences. Let me just close by giving you one example of an institution, a government agency that is interested in this whole badging system, and it's our national parks. And again, perhaps ironic when I'm talking about this when our government is closed, and most of our national parks are closed still today, have been for 2 weeks. But the national parks represent, along with the Smithsonian and NASA, some of our federal agencies that are very interested in badging systems as a way of capturing what students learn in and through their institutions. So when the national parks come back, hopefully within the next week or two, Julia Washburn, our Associate Director for Education and Interpretation, will be quite interested in this MOOC on badges, and also how the national parks can take what has been a kind of informal system of badges called the Junior Ranger Program. The Junior Ranger Program varies tremendously from park site to park site, but to begin to bring that work to higher quality levels and to think about how that can be made available both online and as well as incorporate in-person place-based learning. So I think it's just one example of how badges can relate to our national institutions that are not just universities, but other learning institutions such as science centers and our national parks. And it can also help elevate and bring to greater attention the work that they're doing. So let me pause there. I'm just, as I said, pleased to offer some comments here. And I was just commenting in the chat box that when this idea of learning that counts was mentioned by Aaron, that it made me think about Albert Einstein's great quote that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. I think badges present a way of counting what counts.
Well, thank you so much, Milton. Thanks for being here, and thanks for your insights again.